Hey guys, welcome back to 10 Mile Tools. I'm Hoofty, and today we're going to make this resin inlaid Halloween wall hanging. Check it out. I'm going to start this project by importing an image that I purchased off of Etsy into Carve Pro, which is my favorite program for doing more artistic style CNC carvings. I made a few modifications to it, imported the witch and the cat into it, added a tree into the corner, then added the Happy Halloween in chiller text, because it's Halloween, you have to use chiller. After a quick preview to make sure everything looks right, it's time to prepare some stock. I'm going to be using MDF for this for a few reasons. Number one, it's cheap. Number two, I have a bunch on hand. And number three, it carves really nicely, and it gives a kind of cool effect that I'll show you later on after you've done the epoxy fill. With the piece mounted securely in the CNC machine, I zero it out, and then I begin the first tool path using an 1/8" end mill to rough out the bulk of the waste. With the roughing pass done, I install the 60-degree V-groove bit, and I start the next tool path to do the actual V-carve. Once finished, I remove the piece from the CNC machine, and it's time to get ready for my favorite part, the epoxy pour. After putting on some gloves, I start mixing the epoxy. I'm using a Glaze coat by Wood today. It's a 1-to-1 mix, really easy. It's what I had on hand. It mixes up nice and clear. Only downside to it is it takes a long time to cure. I'm using a digital scale to accurately measure out 100 grams of both part A and part B. I went a little bit over on part A, so I did the same amount on part B. So I forgot to hit record on my camera when I added the mica powder to the epoxy. This is 2 scoops of Blaze Orange Caster's Choice mica and about 2 or 3 drops of the fluorescent orange Alumilite dye. It's always a good idea when you're mixing epoxy to mix it first in 1 cup and then to pour it into a clean cup and use a clean mixing stick and mix it again. This will ensure a thorough mix, and undermixing epoxy is the #1 cause of soft spots and uncured projects. Now we just need to level our workpiece and begin the pour. When pouring epoxy like this, I find it best to pour from high up in a long, thin stream. This helps to release any air bubbles trapped in the epoxy on its way to the piece. The thin stream also works good for getting into tight nooks and crannies. The epoxy I'm using is really thick and doesn't flow into the tiny little nooks and crannies as readily as I'd like. By overfilling the cavities, I'm actually solving 2 problems at once. Number 1, epoxy is going to shrink a little bit as it cures. And number 2, MDF is porous, so it's going to absorb some of the epoxy. Because of its uniform density, the MDF is going to absorb an even amount of epoxy all the way around the edge of all the cutouts. This is going to leave a really cool look after the project is stained. I'm using a blowtorch here to pop all the bubbles that have risen to the surface. Using the sharpened end of a popsicle stick, I start moving the epoxy around to add detail to the background. Swirling the epoxy gives it a really cool look, almost like being on fire. Once you're happy with the way it looks, it's time to just walk away and let it cure. With the piece now fully cured 2 days later, I mount it back in the CNC and begin skimming off the top layer to reveal the full design underneath. I sand thoroughly with 80 grit to remove all the tool marks left by the CNC machine and to get rid of the groove around the edge. I follow that with 180 grit and then 240 grit, and now it's ready for stain. I brush on a thick coat of jet black ebony stain and let it soak in for a few minutes before wiping it off, and then cleaning the surface with mineral spirits. I mix up one more batch of clear epoxy and pour it over the surface. After spreading it with a brush and popping bubbles with a blowtorch, I set it aside to cure. Here you can see the edge around the design where the stain did not soak in because the wood was already hardened by the epoxy. I really like the way this looks, but if you don't, you can always stain the piece before you do the epoxy fill, and that'll prevent that edge from happening. Alright guys, there you go. Here's the finished project. I really like the way this turned out. If you'd like to see more stuff like this, let me know by leaving a thumbs up and subscribing. I'm going to try and make some more videos. I had a whole lot of fun doing this. So thanks guys. Happy Halloween. Think of what you're going to say before you hit record, dumbass.